Hi, I'm Dr. Vertice Perry, and I want to tell you a story. Years ago, when I was in undergrad, actually, I had just graduated. My first job out of college was at the Victims Assistance Agency in Jacksonville, Florida, where I was a researcher. And my job was to not only create surveys and studies, design studies, but to conduct um, assessments of people's experience with crime and their fear of crime. And we measured we measured fear of crime against actual experience, one-on-one experience or up close experience with crime. And the level to which people were afraid of something happening was extremely high. And the probability that it actually had, or the actuality, not the probability, the actuality of it happening, was rather low. If their car had been broken into and someone stole the change from the console in their car, their fear of being murdered in their house was as high as someone who had experienced a gunshot. It was just as high. And so we got to thinking about how people come to those conclusions. And the same way, the same agencies of socialization that teach us about racism or, like the history of the country, those same agencies of socialization that get those things wrong also get that one wrong. And so we're socialized, news people have to create news that makes people stop and watch. And they tend to, there's a saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So there's this idea, a notion that things need to wake you up and get you in and pull you in. But more lately, uh, there's industry selling us on the fear factor of what is going on in your life. Now, this is where critical thinking comes in. I have friends who think that if people were more educated or smarter or whatever, then they would not vote against, act against, speak against their own self-interest. And I happen to know that that's not true. It has nothing to do with how educated we are or what we believe we know. It has more to do with this critical thinking process that helps us to see beyond what we think we know. Let me say it this way: in research, in statistical analysis, when we're trying to find out something, we don't try to prove it right. We actually test the opposite. And when there's no evidence of the opposite being true, the null hypothesis, then there's possibility that what we think is true may be true. And even then, we only say a possibility. We don't say it was definitely true. This is a little convoluted. Let me back up and say this. An animal sees fire, smells fire, hears the crackling of the fire, and runs in the other direction. I step outside, I see fire, I smell fire, I hear fire crackling, and I look over to see if my neighbor is burning something. The first is that the animals do, they're using their common senses. We've confused common sense with common knowledge. Common knowledge is, oh, everybody should know that, and we call that common sense. That's not common sense, that's common knowledge. Common sense is using your basic senses to draw a conclusion. Critical thinking is using the basic senses and the emotions, which are the sixth sense, that will either calm you down or stir you up, right? To then extrapolate based on what we already know and what we've observed. We've got a problem with what people observe because of what they already know. And it is very difficult to get in and show you something different if you think you already know. if your mind automatically goes down that side of, this is going to happen, I know it's going to happen, oh my God, this is going to happen, and then you're in fear to the point where some would say you create that reality so that you can be right, because the ego needs to be right. Common sense is different than common knowledge. Common knowledge is everybody should know that, or as we say, everybody know that. Should be common knowledge that black women outvote everybody. And yet, every election, everybody's like, are you going to vote? Are you telling your friends to vote? Yeah, I'm telling my friends, my white girlfriends. This should be common knowledge. It isn't. Common sense is, I see this and I conclude this just based on my basic senses, not using anything that I've known in the past. Critical thinking pulls in all of that, and I believe that we need to begin to touch people's heart, not with how bad it is for those people. We need to touch people's heart with what their own story is. So I tell stories because we're wired for narrative. We all have a story that connects us and connects us back to the source, connects us back to light. This feels like it was all over the place, but it really wasn't. When I worked at that agency, it made me much more aware of the problems within my own neighborhood, within my own house, within my own head. It made me much, much more aware of those things, because assuming that everything was out there and that all the problems were out there and I need to keep myself safe from out there allows me to ignore the foods that I'm putting in my body, the global warming that I pay no attention to, the chaos in my own home that I help to stir up or create or ignore. Looking out there for the problem is not even the basic use of common senses. It's just not bright, and it's not true. Let's think differently, but more importantly, let's love differently. I love you.